She whispered Chris in the middle of sex. I'm Tom. Turns out, Chris isn't an ex. He's her current coworker. And he's married too. So there I was, thinking everything was perfect between us. We'd been together for 8 months, and honestly, I thought I'd found the one. She was funny, smart, gorgeous, and we had this incredible chemistry that made me feel like I was floating on air every single day. We'd moved in together just 3 months ago, and I was already mentally planning our future together. That night started like any other. We'd ordered takeout, watched some mindless TV show while cuddled up on our couch, and one thing led to another. Everything felt normal, passionate, perfect even. But then it happened. Right in the middle of everything, she breathed out this name so softly, I almost missed it. Chris. I froze completely. My heart stopped beating for what felt like an eternity. I'm not Chris. I'm Tom. I've been Tom my entire life, and she's known me as Tom for 8 months. There was no mistaking what I heard. She must have felt me tense up because she opened her eyes and looked at me with this confused expression. I couldn't even speak at first. My mouth was dry, my hands were shaking, and I felt like the room was spinning around me. When I finally managed to ask her about it, she just laughed. Actually laughed. Like it was the most ridiculous thing in the world. She said she'd been having this weird dream earlier about work stuff, and that sometimes dreams stick with you, you know? She made it sound so casual, so innocent, like it was just one of those silly things that happen sometimes. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But something in my gut was telling me this wasn't right. The way she laughed felt forced, and she couldn't quite meet my eyes when she was explaining it away. Then I remembered something. About 2 months ago, she'd started mentioning this guy from work. Chris. It was always casual mentions. Chris said this funny thing at the meeting. Chris helped her with a project. Chris was so clever about solving this problem. I'd never thought much of it because she talked about lots of coworkers, and I'm not the jealous type. At least, I never thought I was. But now, lying there in the dark after she'd fallen asleep, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every mention of Chris started replaying in my head like a broken record. How her face would light up just a little when she talked about him. How she'd started working late more often. How she'd become more protective of her phone. I spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. Was I being paranoid? Was I letting one slip of the tongue destroy my trust in the woman I loved? But the more I thought about it, the more little things started adding up. The next few days were torture. I tried to act normal, but everything felt different. When she'd mention work, I'd find myself listening for any reference to Chris. When her phone buzzed, I'd watch her face for any telltale signs. When she said she had to work late again, my stomach would drop. I hated myself for becoming this suspicious, paranoid version of myself. This wasn't who I was. I'd always been the trusting, laid-back guy who believed the best in people. But now I was analyzing every word, every gesture, every expression. Update 1. I couldn't take it anymore. The suspicion was eating me alive, and I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. I was snappy, distracted, and basically a mess. She even asked me a couple times if I was okay, which made me feel even worse because here I was, secretly doubting everything about our relationship. So I did something I never thought I'd do. Something that goes against every moral fiber of my being. I waited until she was in the shower one morning, and I checked her phone. My hands were literally shaking as I picked it up. I felt like such a creep, such a violation of her privacy. But I had to know. I had to either confirm my worst fears or put this nightmare to rest once and for all. At first, everything looked normal. Regular text messages with friends, family, coworkers. Nothing suspicious. I almost felt relieved, almost put the phone down and decided to trust her explanation about the dream. But then I noticed something weird. There were these gaps in her message history. Like, she'd have conversations with people that would just suddenly stop and then pick up again days later. But there would be obvious missing pieces. And her phone seemed to have way more apps than I remembered. That's when I found it. Buried in a folder full of boring utility apps was something called Private Vault. I'd never seen it before, and when I clicked on it, it asked for a passcode. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I tried a few obvious combinations. Her birthday, our anniversary, her mom's birthday. Nothing worked. I was about to give up when I had this horrible thought. What if it was his birthday? I realized I didn't even know when Chris's birthday was. But then I remembered her mentioning once that someone at work had the same birthday as her college roommate. Her college roommate's birthday was in March, and I remembered the date because she'd shown me old photos once. I entered those numbers, and the app opened. What I found made me physically sick. Months of messages. Intimate messages. Messages that made it clear this wasn't just some innocent workplace friendship. They'd been having an affair for months, and it was way more serious than I'd ever imagined. The messages were explicit, passionate, and worst of all, they were recent. Like, from the day before. While I was agonizing over whether I was being paranoid, she was planning their next encounter. I learned things I never wanted to know. They'd been meeting up during lunch breaks, staying late at the office together, and she'd even called in sick a few times to spend the day with him. Those work conferences she'd gone to, half of them were just excuses to travel together. But the worst part was reading how she talked about me. How she felt guilty sometimes, but couldn't stop herself. How she was confused about what she wanted. How she thought I was sweet, but that what she had with Chris was electric. I sat there on our bathroom floor, scrolling through months of betrayal, feeling like my entire world was crumbling around me. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship, about her, about us, was a lie. When she got out of the shower, I had to pretend everything was normal. I had to kiss her goodbye and tell her to have a good day at work, knowing she was going to see him. Knowing they'd probably find some excuse to be alone together. Knowing that while I was at my own job, trying to function like a normal human being, she'd be with him. I made it through exactly half a day before I couldn't take it anymore. I left work early, claiming I had food poisoning, and drove around aimlessly for hours. I couldn't go home because I didn't trust myself not to confront her immediately, and I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. I needed to figure out what I was going to do with this information. Do I confront her? Do I just leave? Do I try to get more evidence? My mind was spinning with possibilities, none of them good. Update 2. I spent 3 days in this weird limbo state, knowing the truth but not knowing what to do about it. I was like a zombie, going through the motions of normal life while internally screaming. She kept asking if I was okay, which was almost funny in the most horrible way possible. Here she was, cheating on me for months, asking if I was okay because I seemed a little off. But then I discovered something that changed everything. I was back in that Vault app, torturing myself with more evidence of their affair, when I came across a message that made my blood run cold. She'd sent him a photo of a pregnancy test. Not hers, his wife's. Apparently, Chris had confided in her that his wife was pregnant, and they were both freaking out about it. The messages showed they were panicking about whether to end their affair or if this made it even more exciting somehow. I couldn't believe what I was reading. This wasn't just about my relationship anymore. There was an innocent woman out there, pregnant, completely unaware that her husband was having an affair with my girlfriend. And not just any affair. An affair where they were getting off on the thrill of sneaking around behind her back. The messages got worse. They talked about how the pregnancy made their secret meetings even more intense. How they'd have to be more careful, but couldn't bear to stop. How Chris felt terrible, but couldn't resist her. How she felt like she was addicted to the danger of it all. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just cheating. This was a level of betrayal that went beyond just our relationship. This was about a family being destroyed, a woman being deceived during what should be one of the happiest times of her life. That's when I made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't just going to confront my girlfriend. I was going to tell his wife. I know it sounds crazy, and I know it wasn't really my place, but I couldn't live with myself knowing what I knew and doing nothing about it. If I were in her position, I'd want someone to tell me. I'd want to know the truth, even if it destroyed everything. But first, I had to figure out who she was. The messages mentioned her name a few times, and I knew where Chris worked because it was the same place as my girlfriend. A little social media searching led me to his profile, and from there, I found hers. She looked so happy in her photos. Recent pictures showed her glowing with pregnancy, posting about baby preparations, sharing excited updates about their growing family. It broke my heart to know what I was about to do to her world. I spent an entire night crafting a message to her. How do you tell someone their husband is cheating? How do you destroy someone's life gently? I wrote and rewrote it dozens of times, trying to find the right words, the right tone, the right approach. In the end, I decided to just be direct but kind. I told her who I was, that I discovered my girlfriend was having an affair with her husband, and that I thought she deserved to know. I included some of the evidence, not the most explicit stuff, but enough to prove I wasn't lying or making it up. I sent the message at 2 a.m., then immediately turned off my phone because I couldn't handle waiting for her response. Update 3. I turned my phone back on the next morning to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Most were from numbers I didn't recognize, but a few were from my girlfriend, asking where I was and why I wasn't answering my phone. The pregnant wife had not only believed me, she'd gone completely nuclear. And I mean completely. She'd confronted Chris that morning, and when he tried to deny it, she'd shown him the evidence I'd sent her. Then she'd called my girlfriend directly, and apparently, that conversation had been explosive, but it didn't stop there. She'd also called their workplace and spoken to their supervisor about the inappropriate relationship. She'd called Chris's parents. She'd called her own parents. She'd basically told everyone in their circle what had happened. My phone was buzzing constantly with messages from her, thanking me for telling her, asking for more details, wanting to know how long I'd known. She was hurt and angry and devastated, but she was also grateful that someone had finally told her the truth. Meanwhile, my girlfriend was having a complete meltdown. She'd figured out that I was the one who'd told his wife, and she was furious. Her messages ranged from angry accusations to desperate apologies to threats to promises that she'd end it with Chris if I'd just come home so we could talk. But the craziest part was what happened at their workplace. Apparently, when the supervisor learned about the affair, especially the part about them using company time and resources for their personal relationship, both of them were immediately suspended pending a full investigation. The company had strict policies about relationships between employees, and what they'd been doing was definitely a violation. Word spread through the office like wildfire. Coworkers who'd suspected something were suddenly comparing notes. People started talking about all the times they'd seen them together, all the suspicious behavior they'd noticed but hadn't thought much of at the time. Chris's wife showed up at the office that afternoon. I heard about this through the grapevine of messages I was getting from various people who'd somehow gotten my number. She'd come to clean out his desk and make sure everyone knew exactly why her husband was in trouble. The whole thing became this massive scandal that affected way more people than just the four of us directly involved. Other employees were taking sides, management was scrambling to do damage control, and the entire workplace dynamic was completely destroyed. I still hadn't gone home. I'd been staying at my brother's place, trying to process everything that had happened. My girlfriend had been calling and texting nonstop, and I knew I'd have to face her eventually, but I wasn't ready yet. Then Chris started contacting me. He was furious, blaming me for destroying his marriage and his career. He called me every name in the book, threatened to sue me for invasion of privacy, claimed I'd ruined his life over something that was none of my business. But the thing is, I didn't feel guilty. I felt sad for everyone involved, especially his wife, but I didn't regret telling her the truth. She deserved to know. She deserved to make informed decisions about her life and her marriage, especially with a baby on the way. Final update. It's been 2 weeks since everything exploded, and I'm finally ready to share how this all played out. I eventually went home to face my girlfriend. That conversation was brutal in ways I can't even describe. She cried, she screamed, she begged, she blamed me for violating her privacy. She blamed Chris for pursuing her. She blamed everyone but herself for the choices she'd made. She tried every angle she could think of. She said it was just physical, that she loved me, that she'd been confused and made a mistake. She said Chris had pursued her relentlessly and she'd eventually given in. She said she'd been planning to end it anyway and that my discovering it had just forced her hand. But none of it mattered. The trust was gone. Even if I could forgive the cheating, I couldn't forgive the months of lies, the way she'd looked me in the eye and lied about where she'd been, what she'd been doing, who she'd been with. I couldn't forgive the way she'd made me feel crazy for being suspicious when my instincts had been right all along. She moved out that weekend. We had to divide up all the stuff we'd accumulated together, all the little pieces of the life we'd built that now felt like they belonged to strangers. Every shared item was a reminder of how completely I'd been deceived. Chris and his wife are getting divorced. She kicked him out immediately, and he's been staying with friends while they figure out custody arrangements and all the legal stuff. She's due in 3 months, and she's now preparing to be a single mother, which breaks my heart for her. The fallout at their workplace was even worse than I'd initially heard. The company ended up firing both of them, not just for the affair, but for the way they'd been using company resources and time for personal matters. Apparently, they'd been documenting everything on company devices, which became a huge liability issue. Other employees came forward with stories about how the affair had affected the workplace dynamic, how they'd felt uncomfortable or excluded, how productivity had suffered because of the drama and tension. The whole thing became this massive HR nightmare that affected the entire department. But here's the twist I never saw coming. About a week after everything came out, I got a call from Chris's wife. She wanted to meet in person, to thank me for telling her the truth, but also to tell me something she'd discovered. When she was going through Chris's stuff, she found evidence that this wasn't his first affair. There had been others over the years, and she'd been completely oblivious to all of them. My girlfriend wasn't special. She was just the latest in a long line of women he'd cheated with. She showed me messages and photos dating back years, evidence of multiple affairs, some short-term and some that had lasted for months. She'd been living with a serial cheater for years without knowing it, and finding out about my girlfriend had just been the final straw that made her start digging deeper. She also told me something that gave me chills. She'd suspected something was going on for months, but had convinced herself she was being paranoid. She'd even asked Chris about it directly, and he'd made her feel crazy for being suspicious. Sound familiar? We ended up talking for hours about how we'd both been manipulated, how we'd both been made to feel like we were the problem when our instincts were telling us something was wrong. It was strangely comforting to know I wasn't alone in feeling like I'd been living in some alternate reality. As for me, I'm doing okay. Some days are better than others. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I'm disappointed, but I'm also relieved. I'm relieved that I trusted my instincts. I'm relieved that I found out the truth before I wasted more years of my life with someone who could lie to my face every single day. I'm relieved that I told his wife the truth, even though it caused so much chaos. She's going through hell right now, but at least she's going through it with full knowledge of what kind of person she was married to. She can make decisions about her future based on truth instead of lies. The hardest part is that I really did love her. I loved the person I thought she was, anyway. I had imagined a future with her, had started thinking about marriage and kids and growing old together. That version of her never really existed, but the feelings I had were real, and losing them hurts in ways I didn't expect. I've learned that you can love someone completely and still not really know them at all. I've learned that trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild, no matter how much you want to. I've learned that sometimes doing the right thing means accepting that you're going to hurt people, including yourself. I've also learned that there are different kinds of betrayal. The cheating was bad enough, but the lying was worse. The way she made me feel like I was going crazy when I started to suspect something was worse than the original betrayal. The months of looking me in the eye and lying about where she'd been, who she'd been with, what she'd been doing. That level of deception is something I'm not sure I'll ever fully recover from. But I'm trying. I'm focusing on rebuilding my life, rediscovering who I am when I'm not constantly questioning my own instincts. I'm learning to trust myself again, to believe that if something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. I'm also working on forgiving myself for violating her privacy. I know what I did was wrong, but I also know that it led to the truth coming out. Sometimes there are no perfect choices, and you have to decide which imperfect choice you can live with. The whole experience has changed me in ways I'm still figuring out. I'm more cautious now, more protective of my trust, more aware of red flags. But I'm also more compassionate toward people who've been betrayed, more understanding of why someone might check their partner's phone or follow their instincts even when it feels wrong. I don't know what's next for me. I'm not ready to date again, not ready to open my heart to someone new. I need time to heal, time to figure out how to trust again, time to become whole on my own before I can be part of a couple again. But I do know that I'm glad I found out the truth, as painful as it was. I'm glad I told his wife, even though it caused chaos. I'm glad I trusted my instincts, even when everyone around me was telling me I was wrong. Sometimes the truth destroys everything, but it also sets you free. And right now, freedom feels like the most valuable thing I have.